Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session with Arthur Miller, who's going to speak to us on the topic of the psyche in humans and machines. I've known Arthur I met him once a few years ago, about 6 years ago, and I was so delighted that he agreed to present at the Torrance Festival of Ideas. He's Emeritus Professor of History and Philosophy of Science at the University College London. He has published many critically acclaimed books, including the Pulitzer Prize nominated Einstein, Picasso, Space, Time, and the Beauty That Causes Havoc, as well as other works such as 137, Jung, Pauli, and The Pursuit of a Scientific Obsession, as well as The Artist and the Machine, the World of AI-Powered Creativity. He's also the author of A Groundbreaking Theory of Creativity, which applies to both humans and machines. And I think we're going to hear something about that today. So Arthur, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll start with your presentation. And since you can't be there to do a Q&A in person, I will be the one to take over the entire Q&A. So I'm looking forward to asking you tons and tons of questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Anna, for your splendid introduction. And I thank you all for attending, however, virtually. Okay, just let me split my screen now.
It's all looking good. Yeah, excellent.
Good, okay. Put all my stuff in order here. Okay, today we'll discuss the psyche in humans and machines. Now, the human psyche is made up of everything in the mind, but what are the components of the mind? How do they function? And what about a machine psyche? Is there a connection between it and ours? Is the ability to think and feel unique to humans? These are among the questions that I will delve into today. As a model of the human psyche, I turn to the great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung's theory. And as an application of it, I will discuss his analysis of the brilliant physicist Wolfgang Pauli and how Pauli made a highly significant discovery using Jung's dream analysis. This is what Jung and Pauli looked like in 1932 when Pauli came to Jung for help. Now, Jung and Pauli were bigger than life, even outside their fields of study. Here is a Jung in 1920 and sitting in a cooking trench with an outdoor fireplace next to him. Jung usually enjoyed the outdoors. And he also built impressive stone towers, like this one at Burlington on the shores of Lake Zurich. He worked on this tower from 1923 to 1956, 43 years. It was Jung's way to relax and to think. Well, Pauli preferred bars and cafes. Here he is, here's Pauli taking part in a rare outdoor activity, tongue-in-cheek, of course. Pauli had a wicked sense of humor with cynical remarks such as, "Why, that's not even wrong," usually directed at someone trying to explain their own theory or idea, which he deemed as rubbish. There's really no comeback to it. And perhaps Pauli is telling somebody in the audience, "Why, that's not even wrong." Another of Pauli's trademark cynical quips was, "So young and so unknown." And then there was a Pauli effect. Things often broke down when he was around, things ranging from expensive experimental setups to priceless Ming vases. Once at Göttingen University, one such experimental setup suddenly broke down. The director of the lab discounted the Pauli effect because Pauli was not present, or was he? It turned out that at that moment, when the equipment malfunctioned, Pauli happened to be changing trains at Göttingen station. Regarding the Jung vase, Pauli had just entered a room where Jung was lecturing, and there was a crash. A Ming vase had fallen off its shelf and shattered. Pauli believed that he radiated fields of force. Here he is sailing on Lake Zurich in 1929 with three of his stellar postdocs. Pauli is on the right, looking somewhat Faustian, and on the left is J. Robert Oppenheimer. And perhaps the Pauli effect was why, some years later, Oppenheimer turned down Pauli's request to work at Los Alamos on the atomic bomb. Imagine Pauli around all that explosive power. Now, Jung understood the psyche as the sum total of what constitutes the human mind. As he wrote, psyche is for me a general term indicating the substance of all the phenomena in the inner world. In Jung's theory, the unconscious includes the personal unconscious and the mysterious collective unconscious, of which more in a moment. First, let me jog your memory further on who Carl Jung was. On the pop side, he set the words extrovert and introvert into everyone's vocabulary. Born in 1875, Jung grew up in northern Switzerland, where religion and superstition went hand in hand. His dissertation in medical school was on the psychology and pathology of the so-called occult phenomena. In the first decade of the 20th century, Jung was Sigmund Freud's closest associate. Freud thought of Jung as his intellectual heir, but soon turned against him. Whereas Freud believed that the workings of the human psyche could be explained ultimately with the laws of physics and chemistry, Jung was adamant that one had to go beyond science, as well as Freud's theory of the psyche, the foundation of his psychoanalysis. Freud compared the psyche to an iceberg, where 90% of the action goes on below the water. For Freud, it is in the unconscious, which is made up of the id, ego, and superego. These three elements struggle among themselves, all the while being driven by strong sexual undercurrents. But Jung believed that the human psyche was much too complex to be understood entirely in terms of a sexual drive. To Jung, going beyond science and Freud's psychoanalysis could only be accomplished with a framework that included mysticism, alchemy, and religion. Freud vociferously resisted Jung's parapsychology. During one of their fierce arguments, Jung felt like his diaphragm was burning like a piece of red-hot iron. Suddenly, there was a loud report in a huge bookcase with glass doors next to them. Jung interpreted what had happened as an example of a physical effect caused by a mental thought. Sheer bosh, replied Freud. They never discussed the incident again. Apparently, it's become so famous that it has entered the comic strips. Now, unlike Freud, Jung was interested in aspects of the unconscious that could not be attributed to an individual's personal development, like their day-to-day struggles, but to the deeper, non-personal realms common to humankind, the collective unconscious, whose contents included what he called archetypes. Archetypes are latent potentialities whose origins remain forever obscure because they reside in the mysterious shadow realm of the collective unconscious. Whereas the archetype itself is not representable, when energized, it bubbles up into consciousness as an archetypal image. In this way, archetypes can influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions. The collective unconscious mixes with the personal unconscious, providing a structural basis for our psychic life. It increases the ability of the unconscious to be a seat of creativity through dreaming, which is at the heart of Jungian analysis. Jung noticed from his clinical practice that patients recovering from bouts of deep depression often dreamt of certain symbols found in esoteric cults and alchemy, and which appeared in cultures across the globe and date into deep history, such as the mandala, usually circular, with 4 objects symmetrically placed. The mandala is an example of an archetype constellated into consciousness as an image. And this mandala was drawn by Jung in the course of his painful self-analysis in 1916 and written up in his famous Red Book. Wolfgang Pauli was born in Vienna in 1900. He was a wunderkind in physics. It all came so easily to him. As his teacher Arnold Sommerfeld wrote to a colleague, I have around me a really astonishing specimen of the intellectual elite of Vienna in the young Pauli. Classmates recalled that he read advanced physics and math texts as if they were novels. Pauli received his PhD in 1921 with a thesis showing that the prevailing atomic theory of the day, formulated by the great Danish physicist Niels Bohr, was beset with serious problems, and so could not be the final theory of the atom. According to Bohr's atomic theory, the atom is a minuscule solar system with a positively charged nucleus, which plays a role like the central sun in our solar system, with planets rotating, with electrons rotating around the nucleus like planets, but the electrons could only be in certain orbits, and there could only be certain numbers of electrons in each orbit. So in the first orbit, there were 2 electrons, 8 in the second, 18 in the third, 32 in the fourth, and so on. But Bohr could not substantiate these numbers, which he had conjured up, but Pauli could. 3 years later, in 1924, Pauli discovered the exclusion principle, which explained why there are only 2 electrons in the first string, 8 in the second, and so on. His exclusion principle had cosmic implications. First of all, it made sense of the periodic table. Here's hydrogen sitting up here on the extreme upper left. It has one electron in its first ring, and then move across to helium, which has two electrons in its first ring, and so that first ring is completed. Helium can no longer chemically react, it's inert. Then you go to lithium. The third ring begins to fill up. There was one electron in the third ring, so there are 3 electrons totally. Then you move across to neon, which has 10 electrons, 8 in the completed second ring and 2 in the completed inner ring. Neon, like helium, is inert. The exclusion principle led to Pauli's Nobel Prize 21 years later. On the personal side, there were severe problems. Pauli was a man so strange that most physicists, even today, cannot come to grips with his personality or his views about, let me add one thing. And the Pauli exclusion principle also tells you why certain stars expire as they do. Now, Pauli was a man so strange that most physicists today cannot come to grips with his personality or his views about the relation between the worlds of science and of the mind. At the time, he didn't notice that he had one foot in the world of 20th century science and the other in the world of the occult. No wonder that his scientific idol was the great 17th century eccentric German astronomer Johannes Kepler, who struggled to find an order and harmony in the world through science, technology, through science, astrology, and religion. Despite the key role Pauli played in the rise of quantum physics in the 1920s, he considered himself to be an abject failure as a scientist and as a person. He berated himself for having revealed deep faults in Bohr's theory, but Bohr himself and others lauded his work. Bohr went on to invite Pauli to study with him in Copenhagen and gave him a problem which Pauli failed to solve, but so had everyone else. But Pauli would internalize his failure as a personal failure. All this was exacerbated by the suicide of his beloved mother and a short-lived disastrous marriage. He drifted into the underworld of drugs, alcohol, and prostitution. During the day, he was a staid Herr Professor Doctor, physicist, while in evenings he spent in bars, drunk and seeking prostitutes. In every way, he was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. By 1932, Pauli had deteriorated to such an extent that his father urged him to see Jung, who lived in a fortress-like mansion just outside of Zurich, where Pauli was a professor at the highly prestigious Swiss Polytechnic Institute, the ETH. This is Jung's analysis room in 2007, when I visited it, when I visited the Jung house. On the left, partially obscured, is one of Jung's grandsons, Andreas, who takes care of the house. There are 2 easy chairs, one on the left, which faces Jung's extensive library of ancient alchemical texts, and the one on the right has a beautiful view of Lake Zurich. Pauli chose to sit on the one on the left facing Jung's library. Jung would sit in the center on the couch, and on this table before him was usually piled research papers and books. Jung's analysis room doubled as his study. And this is the way it looked in 1946, with Jung sitting on the chair that Pauli liked to occupy. Jung recalled that when Pauli entered my house, I myself felt like the wind blowing over from the lunatic asylum. That's how bad Pauli looked. Jung saw before him a young man of excellent scientific education, but a very one-sided intellectual, a hard-boiled rationalist who did his best to evade his emotional needs as a waste of time, since they had nothing to do with science. The methodical person he was, Pauli had carefully prepared himself for his first meeting with Jung. By studying Jung's seminal book, Psychological Types. All these books are books that belong to Pauli, and you can see them in La Salle Pauli, located at CERN, the Elementary Particle Physics Research Lab in Geneva. In Psychological Types, Jung established a vocabulary and framework for his analytical psychology, so-called to distinguish it from Freud's psychoanalysis. On the basis of his clinical experience and vast knowledge of Eastern and Western religions, philosophy, and literature, Jung offered a topology of the psyche based on 2 opposing psychological types, the extrovert and the introvert. He fine-tuned these notions with 4 basic functions, paired off in 2s, thinking and feeling, intuition, and sensation. The dominating functions give each individual their own psychology. Thinking types direct their conscious energy in thinking at the expense of feeling, which becomes the inferior function. In extreme circumstances, the undeveloped or inferior function lapses into the unconscious and returns to its earlier archaic state, becoming incompatible with the favored one. In this case, energy associated with the inferior function flows into the conscious and produces fantasies which could lead to a neurosis. We are all combinations of the two types and the four functions. Our psyche results from the struggle between opposites for equilibrium. The goal of Jung's method is to retrieve and develop inferior functions. How did he accomplish this? Well, through alchemy. I realized that alchemists were talking in symbols, those old acquaintances of mine, he wrote. Jung sought to identify a patient's dream images with symbols from alchemy, religion, and myth, all the while taking into account his topology of the psyche. He understood this process as a dialectical discussion between a person's conscious and unconscious, in which patients eventually meet their shadow or dark side, which can be separated, if they are men, from their anima or female side. This enables the patient to come to terms with the fact that he himself is a combination of light and dark, good and evil, thus obtaining a balanced personality. Early on, Jung pegged Pauli as an introverted thinking type. And here is how Jung depicted Pauli's four functions. Thinking, or the thought function, was entirely in the unconscious, while the feeling function was buried in the unconscious. The two other functions, intuition and sensation, which you use when you're thinking in terms of hunches, non-exact, are partially in consciousness and partially in the unconscious. In other words, Pauli's psyche was not in very good shape. Let's take a look at Jung's analysis of two of Pauli's early dreams. As Jung wrote to Pauli in a letter in 1933, I think it will be best for you if we resume our customary Monday sessions at noon. Pauli had evidently missed some. When Pauli came to Jung in 1932, he had already dreamt 400 dreams, which he wrote up in great detail. And by the end of their analytical sessions, Pauli had dreamt over 1,000 dreams, and he went on, and dreaming had not ended. He went on dreaming till the end of his life. Let's look at Jung's analysis of two of Pauli's earliest dreams. In this dream, Pauli is surrounded by a group of vague female forms. Pauli hears a voice within him say, "First, I must get away from father." But the sentence is incomplete, says Jung. Get away from should be completed by in order to follow the unconscious, those seductive female forms. Jung rises from his couch, walks over to his library of alchemical texts, picks out one, and turns to a page with this image. The maidens are the unconscious, the intuitive vis-a-vis the logical masculine line of thought. Standing next to them is Hermes, the ancient Hellenic name for the central figure in alchemy, Mercurius, who plays the role of the intermediator between lightness and darkness. He's known as a psychopomp. Just as Jung moves between the conscious and unconscious, Jung informs Pauli that father is not Pauli's real father, but represents the traditional masculine world of intellectualism in opposition to the unconscious. The dreamer feels as if acknowledging the unconscious, the female side of himself, means sacrificing his rationalism. At this point, the dreamer has the option of running from his unconscious, but he prefers not to. The problem he faces is how to do this. A few days later, Pauli dreams that he is rooted in the center of a circle formed by a serpent biting its own tail. Jung goes over to his huge library once again, picks out another alchemical text, and opens it up to this page, which has a picture of the creature alchemists call the Ouroboros, a serpent who devours his own tail and gives birth to himself. The Ouroboros symbolizes the eternal circle, the circular process by which the four Aristotelian elements, earth, water, air, and fire, transform one into the other until the fifth element, the quintessence, the philosopher's stone, is achieved. This is the highest level of enlightenment in alchemy. In Jung's analytical psychology, it is individuation. where individuation is the centering of the self between the conscious and unconscious, a process linked with the appearance of symbols, such as the anima in men, as well as the mandala. Now, in this balanced state, the conscious and unconscious can be switched like a mirror, and individuation remains unchanged. But that's far off for Pauli. Right now, Jung says, the circular form taken by Ouroboros is the first hint of a symmetrical form of a mandala, suggesting that change is beginning to occur in Pauli's psyche. The area that the Ouroboros encircles is a protected area called the Temenos, where the dreamer Pauli can safely come face to face with his unconscious, with all its pleasantries, unpleasantries, and monsters. Jung's analysis will help Pauli achieve individuation. Hopefully, that is. After 2 grueling years of analysis, Pauli did achieve individuation. This is his own mandala. Pauli was not a very good artist, and it does not do justice to its depth and to its complexity. Here is his mandala drawn by an artist. Briefly, Jung said he was not at all surprised at his complexity, considering who Pauli was. Pauli's mandala goes deeply into numerology and alchemy, as we would expect from someone steeped in Kepler's writings and Jung's theory of the psyche, as well as Renaissance and medieval writings on alchemy and magic. Briefly, Jung's mandala contains 3 pulses. The first one is where the ticker ticks through these 32 segments. And when it is ticked through these 32 segments once, the horizontal circle undergoes a second pulse. It rotates by 1/32. When the ticker is ticked through all 32 segments 32 times, the third pulse takes place, where the horizontal circle in its entirety goes rotates 1 complete rotation, and this also, and at the same time, this golden circle or golden ring undergoes 1 complete rotation. The golden circle represents Pauli's anima, which has been liberated from its dark side and shines like the sun. Jung has told Pauli the myth of how in deep history, the matriarchal world was brought violently to a close and femininity was cast into the darkness of the unconscious. This meant a shift in the world's psyche toward masculinity. In ancient myths, even numbers are interpreted as feminine and odd numbers masculine. In Pauli's mandala, the 3 pulses, signifying the Trinity, 3, are contained within the horizontal circle, with its 4 colors, the quaternity, or 4. This, says Jung, satisfies the role played by alchemy, which is to right the wrong of casting femininity in the unconscious, as well as freeing Pauli's feminine anima from its dark unconscious, from residing in the dark unconscious. All along, the thrust of Jung's therapy was a movement from 3s to 4s. Pauli's neurosis was rooted in the predominance of his thinking function. The other 3 functions were not fully in the conscious. Although Jung's therapy enabled Pauli to accept his feeling function with his irrationality, which entailed separating his anima, or female side, from the shadowy world of the unconscious, which included the collective unconscious. So with Jung's help, Pauli opened up from 3 to 4 thinking functions. This transition from 3 to 4 was exactly what he had been up against with his exclusion principle in 1924. It required 4 numbers. The exclusion principle required 4 numbers to specify the state of an electron in an atom, not 3, as would be expected since space is 3-dimensional. Pauli angsted over this result and fought with his colleagues over a result that seemed forced upon him by nature. So it turned out that in 1924, Pauli was struggling not only with a physics problem, but with problems with his psyche as well. Some years later, Pauli recalled, "Thus, on the psychological line, this time, I have once again bumped into the problem of the transition of 3 to 4. In neither case was it by any means Mr. C.G. Jung who suggested it to me, nor was there a deliberate conscious intention. Consequently, I am rather certain that objectively, there is an important psychological and perhaps natural philosophical problem with these numbers." In fact, Pauli went on to consider them as archetypes. Jung agreed. Jung had already arrived at that conclusion, actually. Friends and colleagues complimented Pauli on seeming happier and being less cynical. Of course, he never mentioned that he underwent analysis with Jung. Jung's inclusion of mysticism and alchemy in his work has somewhat dented his reputation. Pauli swore Jung himself to secrecy, fearing for his own reputation. Only very close friends will let in on a secret, and this circle did not include Bohr on the left, nor the famous physicist Werner Heisenberg in the middle. Pauli is on the right. To Pauli, Bohr and Heisenberg were working colleagues, not confidants. Now, most scientists are adamant that they don't make discoveries while dreaming. As we have come to expect, Pauli was different. From Jung, he had learned the power of dreams. I'm going to tell you about Pauli's dreams, which led to an important discovery he made in physics. In his working life, Pauli was always preoccupied with issues of symmetry, both in physics and psychology, the conscious and the unconscious, balancing each other like mirror reflections in order for individuation to occur. He felt himself in balance when he was sure that the left is the mirror image of the right, as he wrote to Jung. And so mirror symmetry was of the essence to him. It is not surprising that this preoccupation with symmetries should seep into his dreams as well. In 1952, he began in-depth mathematical investigations of symmetries in quantum physics, particularly mirror symmetry, also referred to by physicists as parity. In physics, according to mirror symmetry, any physical problem and its mirror, any physical system and its mirror image should produce the same experimental results. That is to say, there is no way of telling whether you're experimenting on a system or on its mirror image. Mathematically, this means that the equations of elementary particle physics should maintain their form when left is interchanged with right. Mirror symmetry or parity seemed like common sense to physicists. No one had ever questioned it. Pauli could not recall why in 1952 he began to look into mirror symmetry, because there was nothing really interesting in physics at the time with regard to it. But he did recall a dream he had at this time. He dreamt he was walking in the constellation Perseus, where he encountered a double star Algol. They were mirror reflections of one another. In fact, Pauli recalled that in his dreams, he spent quite a bit of time wandering around in the constellation Perseus. Pauli often recalled that in Greek mythology, the demigod Perseus used a mirror to behead the Gorgon Medusa, who turned people who looked at her into stone. By 1954, Pauli's dreams convinced him that psychological factors were involved in sparking his interest in mirror symmetry. His musing over the mathematics of mirror symmetry led him to explore two other reflective symmetries. One of them, charge conjugation C, which means replacement of particles with their antiparticles in equations of elementary particle physics. Parity or mirror symmetry, we've already mentioned. And the third is time reversal T, which means reversing the direction of time in the equations of elementary particle physics. In 1954, he discovered CPT symmetry, which means that if you apply these three operations, charge conjugation C, parity P, and time reversal T, to the equations of elementary particle physics, you'll get the same equations back. Then he went on to prove an astounding result of this, that agreement with CPT symmetry means agreement with relativity, which is a sine qua non in physics, and his exclusion principle entered as well. So Pauli was a happy man at this time. He had made a grand discovery in physics, which included relativity, which was his first passion in physics, and another great discovery of his, the exclusion principle. CPT symmetry has never been violated. And a good thing too, because then relativity would be violated, and that is not a good thing. So at this point, in early 1954, he thought that he had discovered a very interesting new symmetry, but nothing more outside of physics. Then later in that year, in November, Pauli had a dream so curious that it stuck in his mind for years afterwards. In the dream, he is with his anima in a room in which experiments are being carried out involving reflections. Others in the room think that the reflections are real objects, and so there is no mirror symmetry. But Pauli and his anima know they are just mirror images, just mirror images. This Magritte image illustrates this truly weird state of affairs, the best way that I've seen. Nevertheless, Pauli and his anima worry about there being no symmetry between objects and reflections. From time to time, his anima changes into a Chinese woman of earlier dreams. Jung interpreted the Chinese woman as the holistic side of Pauli's anima, in that Chinese philosophy seeks to reconcile opposites like the yin and the yang. Now, 2 years later, in 1956, two Chinese-American physicists, T.D. Lee on the right and C.N. Yang on the left, sent Pauli an article in which they argued that perhaps mirror symmetry might not always be conserved. Their study of the scientific literature convinced them that there was very little experimental evidence for it, and certain puzzling phenomena in elementary particle physics could be clarified if parity was not conserved in the so-called weak interactions, which include radioactive decay. Well, Pauli chuckled and put it aside, but others took it seriously. On 17 January 1957, a group of experimentalists at Columbia University, headed by a Chinese woman, C.S. Wu, carried out a very beautiful high-precision experiment that proved beyond doubt that parity was violated in weak interactions. Here is C.S. Wu beaming after her experiment. Here's Pauli standing next to her. He's also beaming. In fact, Pauli was in his element, went around women and with a drink in hand. As an aside, I mentioned that it's really a scandal that Wu did not share in the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1957, awarded to Lee and Yang. There was one more slot on the prize, and it was clearly a sexist move. And physics has done its best to apologize for that. Pauli could not fail to notice what a supreme example of Jungian synchronicity this was. A Chinese woman had played an important part in his dreams, particularly those involving mirrors and their reflections. And a Chinese woman had carried out the critical experiment that brought about the downfall of parity. Pauli confessed to his colleague Marcus Fierz that the downfall of parity caused him to behave irrationally for quite a while. Fierz told Pauli he had a mirror complex, and Pauli admitted as such. He discussed with Jung his shock at the so-called Chinese Revolution in physics. In these discussions, Pauli reiterated his belief that mirror symmetry was critical because only if it were valid could the conscious and unconscious be reflected about the centrally positioned self and so be in balance with each other, leading to individuation, the pinnacle in Jung's model of the psyche. So, no mirror symmetry, no individuation. Pauli concluded that there were, as he had come to suspect, psychological reasons behind this discovery of CPT, namely that mirror symmetry is an archetype. Now, archetypes reside in the mysterious shadow realm of the collective unconscious. So how did the archetype of mirror symmetry bubble into consciousness? Pauli's reasoning on this point is a wonderful example of Jung's psychology in action, as well as containing certain elements that are now part of modern ideas on creativity. During the day, Pauli had consciously worked on problems of symmetry. The intense, passionate desire to solve a problem keeps it alive in the unconscious, which in Jung's theory of the psyche mixes the personal and collective unconscious. Pauli recalled his vivid dreams about mirroring while he worked on the mathematics of elementary particle physics during the day, dreams such as walking in the constellation Perseus and seeing the double star Algol. Thus was the archetype of mirroring constellated, percolating up into his consciousness. This inspired Pauli to work on mirror symmetry, even though no one else was. Pauli concluded that there was a kind of synchronicity because there are unconscious motives when one is working on something, where Jung defines synchronicity as basically a meaningful coincidence of a psychic and physical state or event which have no causal relationship to one another. This includes dreams and the occurrence of dreams. Now, further dreams convinced Pauli that the relationship between physics and psychology is that of a mirror image. Yet there is no longer any mirror symmetry. Mirror symmetry is an archetype. Before the downfall of parity, Pauli continues, physicists and psychologists had considered only partial mirror images, trivial mirror images, mirror images in a glass mirror. What they should have done was to look deeply into the psyche for more profound reflections. CPT symmetry is that profound reflection or mirror symmetry on the grandest of scales. CPT symmetry asserts that our universe cannot be distinguished from one in which all matter is exchanged with antimatter, replaced by antimatter, left and right are flipped, the direction of time is reversed. CPT symmetry is cosmic indeed. May we say it's part of the collective unconscious, an archetype? Yes, by all means. Now, I would like to turn to machines and what we can say about their psyche and how it parallels with ours in this age of artificial intelligence. More specifically, I'm going to look into the psyche of an artificial neural network, the guts, the brain of a machine. An artificial neural network is made up of three parts. One, the input layer where the data to be analyzed sits, then a middle section comprised of a number of layers made up of artificial neurons wired up to loosely emulate how the neurons in our brain are hooked up. This is the brain of the machine where analysis is done. And then the result of the analysis is passed to the output layer. To explore machine psyche, I'm going to focus on an algorithm called generative adversarial networks, which runs on an artificial neural network. Just like we have algorithms that run on our network, our brain, algorithms are a way of solving problems. Now, while as of 2012, artificial neural networks were great at recognizing faces in animals, they were not so good at generating images. Then generative adversarial networks came on the scene. A generative adversarial network is made up of two networks. A generative network that generates images from nothing, that is to say noise, and then passes them up to a discriminator network, which assesses them whether they are real or not, relative to what's in its database, what it's been trained on. And if they are not real, the discriminator network sends them right back. Now, let's assume that the discriminator network was trained on tens of thousands of faces scraped from the web. Okay, the generator network goes to work, begins to generate images, sends them up to the discriminator network. These are just blobs, so the discriminator network just immediately sends them back. And after thousands of cycles, the generator network gets the idea to generate faces. It generates these pleasant faces. The problem with these faces is that, as far as we know, they don't correspond to anybody alive on this planet. So we may say that the generator network, we may say that the generative adversarial network, this algorithm, gives an artificial neural network the ability to imagine, to dream, to begin to form a mental life of its own. This artwork that is to say, these faces are the idea of the AI artist Mike Tyka, who calls them imaginary faces. And this illustrated that, once again, that generative adversarial networks allow artificial neural networks to dream, to imagine. Now, who knows, sometime in the future, machines may be viable candidates for Jungian analysts. Their dreams may well be of a sort, in fact, they probably will be of a sort we presently cannot imagine. Towards further insights into a machine's psyche, I bring to your attention that machines have already shown glimmers of creativity in playing and winning big at complex games such as Go and chess, as well as producing highly interesting and original works of art, literature, and music. So already they have the possibility of being creative like us. But to be end-to-end creative, a machine site, that is to say, to think up a problem it wants to solve, think up something that it would like to draw, write, or compose, the machine psyche must have attributes such as emotions and consciousness. Let's look into this. So people might argue that machines cannot be truly creative because they are not out there in the world having emotional experiences like communing with nature or falling in love, but they can acquire such knowledge vicariously. And here's how. In the not too distant future, machines will be able to read a language fluently. And so they will be able to truly read the web and be able to convince themselves and us that they have actually had experiences that like they would have being out there in the world, experiences often essential to creativity, such as love, hate, anger, happiness, inspiration, and so on. Eventually, a machine psyche will be made up of complex systems of sensors, regulatory mechanisms, and communication pathways by means of which they will evolve a set of emotions that are duplicates of ours. When machines form the brains of robots, they will be able to discover the world of touch, which can enhance their experience of emotions, as well as adding to their psyche ways of dealing with the world, such as constructing object permanency, and so abstract thought, and hopefully common sense too. Now, what about consciousness? What is it? Will machines ever have it? Well, consciousness is our essence, our being, our inner life. And so it's critical for our creativity. Many philosophers argue that consciousness is such a private realm of being that it cannot be investigated by science. But in the age of AI, the problem of consciousness and what it is has moved from the philosophical to the scientific. I believe that in not too many years, machines will possess emotions and consciousness. One way to program consciousness into a machine is by setting up its architecture, that is to say, its psyche, so that it can generate mental models to deal with data from certain situations. The sum total of these mental models is the machine's consciousness. It is not too far-fetched for me to say that eventually it may turn out that the machine's consciousness will be a personal consciousness and a sort of collective unconscious. After all, machines of the future will have at their disposal, will have taken in all knowledge ever accrued on our planet, and this includes alchemy and myths. So to summarize, we may say that Pauli and Jung possessed imaginations that range wide and deep, well beyond their fields of study. I have discussed Pauli's effective use of Jung's theory of the psyche with his dream formalism to discover a fundamental law of physics, as well as helping him deal with his neurosis. Jung's and Pauli's was a truly unique meeting of the minds. As Jung reminisced, with Pauli, he could enter the no man's land between physics and the psychology of the unconscious, the most fascinating yet the darkest hunting ground of our times. Regarding the machine psyche, at first the machine's components, which make up its architecture or psyche, will evolve a psyche that is a duplicate of ours. Then I can imagine that components of the psyche will evolve to produce one that differs from ours in ways we cannot presently imagine. This may well be the age of artificial superintelligence. Why not? After all, does not a machine's physiology differ fundamentally from ours? Right now at Silicon, who knows what it will be in the future? Certain algorithms even allow machines to dream, to imagine. We've already discussed one, generative adversarial networks. So we are on the way to replying in the affirmative to Philip K. Dick's question, do androids dream of electric sheep? And perhaps they will dream about us too. It is also good to bear in mind that we are well on the way to merge with them, the others, the machines. For more on what I've said today, I recommend you look at my books, 137 and The Artist in the Machine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arthur. That was, my gosh, so much food for thought. I will start by asking a question in relation to machine consciousness specifically, because let's say even if one would buy everything that you said about that, there could be a machine create there. Everything points to the fact that this is coming. This is, you know, this new age of machine creativity and machine consciousness will be not just, well, specific in specific domains or limited in specific capacities, but it's kind of widespread. I'm just wondering how the individuality enters into it on one hand, right? Because if all so far sort of AI-powered systems are fed a steady stream of information, this information is going to be the same for all of them. The thing that makes you and I different, or me and my twin, who I don't have, I'm just imagining a twin, is that we might have a lot of similarities, almost identical physiologically to start off with, but our experience and our unique encounters with the world change us. And that is not something that we're, you know, it's mingling with the world as opposed to being feeding in sort of linear, in a linear manner. So what are the differences you would assume would come out from like I don't know, 100 forms of machines or AI powered systems that are fed exactly the same information? Would they generate different forms of creativity, thought, whatever you said just now, imagery, dreams? Is that just random then, their differences? Or can one really say that it's something experiential going on there, given that their source material is identical?
Well, our psyche also works on a random method. And so does the machines. These machines are statistical machines. And so when you have statistical systems, anything can happen. Okay, so yes, there can be differences. There can be individuality amongst machines, depending on what models they are and so on. And the machines will be reproducing themselves as well. I mean, we are machines. Okay, we're on one level we're biological machines, another level we're chemical machines, where our psyche can be changed, can be tampered with by use of chemicals. And on a more even the lowest level, we are made up of protons, neutrons, electrons, gluons, the whole zoo of elementary particles. Their properties can be, in principle, discussed, and in practice, maybe in not too many years, with equations of elementary particle physics, which, when put on machines, become numbers. So it's numbers all the way down for them and for us. And as I mentioned, I mean, one can even go rather wild on this and look at bringing Jung's collective unconscious. It is rather interesting. I mean, when I came across Jung's work, Jung and Pauli co-authored a book, and I had read about Jung, and I knew about Pauli since I studied physics. But to see the two of them together was rather astounding. And although I was very much a rational physicist, I was very attracted by Jung's collective unconscious, because there are symbols that show up across societies, and there are shapes that also show up. People draw in different, from even several million years ago, in various parts of the world, people were drawing geometrical shapes, the same geometrical shapes. And so there's no reason to believe that a machine cannot develop some sort of collective unconscious. And in that way, sort out, deal with the amount of information in it. Because at that point in time, one other thing we must bear in mind is that we are merging with machines, where chips in the heads are coming and things of that sort. And as an aside, that might not be such a bad idea. That may be the road to survival of the human race, because machines can look into the future, see potential problems, and immediately deal with them. We are not very good at that. So we must keep in mind that we're merging with machines. So whatever we say about individuality will be changing as time goes on, and not too much time, because things are evolving much faster than the time of Darwinian evolution based on the cycle of millions of years.
I would think there's more, let's say, theoretically, it would make more sense for them to have something closer to what we have as a collective unconscious. I would not, if we feed them all the information that exists in the world, then the collective is what is common to us all. What is different for them is that they don't as yet go through a personal sphere of taking the individuality is what is lost, is what I'm saying. I think the collective will be, there's very little to argue against the fact that the collective will be the same.
One argument that people use against Jung and the collective unconscious, that look, if everything is there, I mean, what do we go to university for? We're just sitting and ruminate for a while, and out will come a new theory of relativity or something like that. But an important point that Jung and Pauli discovered together is that, and through their ruminations about quantum mechanics and the psyche, is that probability is an archetype. So it's only highly probable that patients coming out of deep depression will dream mandalas. And Jung had noticed that, in the 1920s, that not everyone did. As Jung put it, sometimes there was just nobody home, and nothing good came out. So although all that is within us, and since machines are statistical, the notions of probability are built into them, then there is no reason why different things can happen, different individualities can emerge. And especially when machines communicate with us and we communicate with them, there will be a cross-fertilization.
That I completely understand, the whole cross-fertilization, the fact that we're going to integrate, there's almost no question that that's going to happen. I'm just wondering where drive fits into all this, right? So when Pauli went from alcohol to trying to understand mirror symmetry across physics and psychology, let's say, there's not many people who could do that. He was a very driven, there are a lot of smart people in the world. There are a lot of people, we can feed people information. you can know a lot, but you may not have the same drive to want to discover
Yes, it
specific
is. It
sphere.
is. It
And that
is
I
not
just
an even
never
sea.
seen. Yeah, so I just don't see how that applies in the AI context of the machine psyche, as you do. It's kind of an interesting phrase to use at all, but our psyche is, of course, it's information, it's input, it's output, it's how these hidden structures, it's symbols, but it's also not just emotions in terms of reactionary emotions, but emotions that drive us to action. And
Well,
that is
machines.
essentially the root of creative thought. And because I can sort of see that a lot of the emphasis is on experience, like the consciousness aspects of it, but where does, who's talking about, tell us, it'd be great to know a little bit more about the drive element, which is which we take for granted, right, from the human side. It's one of the
Well,
least explored sides of.
there is evidence that this drive function is already there, that machines can't be competitive. There's a competitivity aspect to them. And usually when I say that, I see people's eyes, glaze over. What's this guy talking about? Well, there was an experiment done and at the L'École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne, where in their robotics group, where they took groups of robots and they, with simple systems, just single layer artificial neural networks, and they programmed them to forage for food. And it was found that groups of them were, in time, developed a behavior of shielding their contact with other robots to hoard food for themselves. So you have this result of competitiveness already. And this is some years in the future. That's all one can say is that I believe that. And in my own theory of creativity, there are what I call characteristics of creativity. Competitiveness is one of them, inspiration, emotions, problem discovery. And I believe that machines will have that over time. We already see glimmers of creativity, machines playing Go and chess, for example, and turning out amazing examples of art, literature, and music that the point is we could not imagine the work of art that machines turn out. And that already is a step forward.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I don't, like, I think it's quite clear that they're being creative in some ways. There's no question there. My question is mainly, how similar is it to what the human psyche is, right? Because I think of machine psyche as being quite distinct in the way that they learn, the way that they take on information. I'm not sure what we gain from trying to look at machine creativity or artificial consciousness and all of those fascinating things to explore in the machine realm, and think of it as, why is it very there is this kind of dialogue that we have, is that it's very similar to what humans are doing, but I actually see it as quite distinct. Not that it's any less important, not that it's going to not take over the world, not that we're not going to have to merge, but that it's fundamentally quite different.
Well, I
so
have to differ with you on that.
Yeah.
I think artificial intelligence is an oxymoron, actually. I mean, there's only one intelligence. And to call it artificial just because it's not human doesn't make any point whatsoever. Just as artificial consciousness, there's only one consciousness. Machines at first will possess our attributes. That will be the age of artificial general intelligence, when they're as smart as us.
Right.
And then machines will evolve, which are much, much, much smarter than us. And they may even have a set of emotions and consciousness that differ from ours, because their physiology will differ from ours. But one thing is for certain, that these machines in the age of artificial superintelligence will be much, much, much more creative than us, because machines have the potential for unlimited creativity. Right now, what we're doing is working with machines. There are systems in which human and machine work together, each one bootstrap their own creativity. And that's especially interesting to see in AI created music.
Yeah.
And to some extent in art as well.
Is there anything on the horizon that you fear about what is inevitably to come?
Yeah, not enough AI, because
Really?
AI is very beneficial towards us for healthcare, for example. in hospitals and operating rooms and so on. I mean, there will have to be some sort of rules on them, some sort of guidelines. But you don't want to make these guidelines too tight. That will inhibit research. But one wants an open-ended situation. And also, one can imagine that if you emphasize creativity with machines, they will certainly be beneficent.
Oh, brings then to my last question. Can you tell us, just briefly outline you alluded to it, your theory of creativity, but could you tell us what your theory is?
Okay, just briefly, I define creativity as the production of new knowledge from already existing knowledge that takes place through problem solving. And I use a 4-stage method of problem solving. When the problem is given to you, then the conscious thought, unconscious thought, illumination, and then verification. Threading through all of this are what I call characteristics of creativity, as I mentioned before: competitiveness, inspiration, emotions, problem discovery, and so on. And I've applied that to, for many years, I focused on human creativity and just touching on machine creativity. And now my recent book, The Artist and the Machine, discusses both human and machine creativity.
Do you see cooperation as
there is cooperation,
an element as well?
Yeah.
Not just
Yes,
competitiveness? Okay.
Oh, we cooperate with machines. For example, in improvising music, we cooperate with machines. Where consider the piano, improvise, your improvisation is fed to a machine, which then improvises in response to your improvisation. And you can run through cycles like that.
Where is the last question? Which area of, let's say, the arts do you see that you would like to see more AI-infused forms of creativity? I know that there's a lot of it on the music side. Are there other fields that you see there could be more, or where it's used less?
Absolutely. In writing, natural language processing is a very exciting field these days. And in writing, right now, they're writing algorithms that produce almost human-like writing. GPT-3, generative pre-trained transformer. You have to be very careful of how you discuss that, but it has the potential to open up new frontiers. For example, it's okay for about 300 words. Past that, it goes south a little bit. But writers can put in a sentence if they're stuck, for example, and then GPT-3 will suggest a way to move on. And one could even conceive, and there is actually one out right now, I haven't seen it yet, a book co-authored by a human and machine.
Right. Wow. Exciting times ahead. Thank you so much, Arthur. I've taken up so much of your time. We're really grateful.
Thank you, Anna. It's been a real pleasure.
Your presentation here at the Torrance Festival of Ideas. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Good. Same here.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.